What is Stoicism and why is everyone suddenly talking about it? Here's the thing, we're living in the most overwhelming time in human history. We have notifications going off constantly, comparison culture is on steroids, and honestly, most of us are just trying not to have a breakdown in the grocery store checkout line. Stoicism offers something different, a way to stay grounded when everything around you is chaos. And with that, welcome to Stoicism But Make It Cute, where I, Louise, a psychologist and overthinking girly in recovery, break down ancient Stoic wisdom and translate it into something we can actually use in real life. So whether you're completely new to this topic or you just want a refresher, this episode's for you. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so I can keep these episodes coming for you. As always, we're starting with a Stoic quote, and today's comes from Epictetus, who said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." I chose this quote because it perfectly captures why I love this philosophy so much, and that's because it's practical philosophy. Oftentimes philosophy can feel a bit dry. You know, you're pondering these big life questions, but then at the end of the day, how do you actually go about your life? Stoicism has answers and so many practical tools, and that's why I like it. When you read the writings, they don't just talk about truth or beauty, they talk about grief and anger, about mornings when they didn't want to get out of bed. You know, it's very human. So Stoicism basically teaches you an emotional strategy for the super chaotic world that we live in. It teaches you how to respond with intention rather than just reacting out of habit. And this is something modern psychology is echoing. You know, our brains love habits, even the unhelpful ones. And so Stoicism interrupts that autopilot and gives you a way to choose again. Now, I won't give you a full history lesson, I promise, but I wanted to give you a brief overview of where the philosophy came from. Stoicism originated in ancient Greece, but then only became popular a little bit later in ancient Rome. It is over 2,000 years old, but it is still so relevant today. If anything, the fact that people were struggling with the same worries centuries ago just proves how timeless the advice is. So here's 3 different key figures people always talk about when it comes to Stoicism, and I wanted to introduce you to them briefly. The first one on the left is Marcus Aurelius. He is the OG reflection and journaling king on top of being a Roman emperor. He wrote his very famous work Meditations, which I have a copy of here. It's basically a journal to himself. He wrote down things he wanted to remind himself of and remember every day. He never meant it to be published, so it feels surprisingly intimate, which I find very cool. The second guy, who you can see in the middle picture, is Epictetus, and he was a slave who then later became a free man. And he basically taught power over your own mind and the dichotomy of control, which we covered in episode 1. His whole deal was like, life will hand you unfairness, but nobody can take your inner freedom, which is super powerful. His work is called Enchiridion, and it's quite short, so I recommend you also check that out. And then the last guy we have here on the right is Seneca. He was a rich philosopher and advisor. He wrote letters with advice, which you can read in Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. He was big on mortality and morality, and reading him can feel like getting a direct pep talk from someone who's brutally honest, but also deeply compassionate. Next, I'd like to bust some myths, because Stoicism might not actually be what you think it is. Maybe the biggest misunderstanding about Stoicism is that Stoics don't feel any emotions, which is just not true. Stoics were never about suppressing your emotions. They were more about like taking a more rational approach to your thoughts and your emotions. They just wouldn't allow their emotions to make decisions for them, if that makes sense. It's less be a robot and more be the driver, not the passenger. The second myth is that Stoicism is about being cold or passive, because people think Stoicism is basically the ancient equivalent of toxic masculinity, which again, I don't find to be true at all. Stoicism is actually a very active approach in the sense that you try and reflect on your actions, you choose your responses, you choose how you show up in this world. And whenever you read one of the original works, I don't think it reads cold at all. I would even say the opposite, because it's so warm in a sense sense that it's very reflective and it's so human. And these are people who have gone through shit and who have really thought about what they wanted to teach people. Honestly, some passages almost read like therapy notes. There's so much gentleness there if you're willing to look closely. The third myth is also related to that, and it's the thinking that you must be tough at all times. Yes, Stoicism is about becoming more resilient, but it's about embracing both sides, right? Like your softer and your tougher side. Because different kinds of situations require different kinds of handling. And in some situations, a very strong response could be to be vulnerable, right? Vulnerability can be a form of courage, and Stoics knew that. So the last myth is that it's old white man energy, which I also kind of get because yes, the ideas are ancient, but like I said, they're still so relevant today, which is what makes it so intriguing, right? The problems they wrote about, like stress, grief, and disappointment, are the exact same ones that we're still dealing with today. If you're enjoying this little dive into Stoicism, make sure to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the future episodes. Enough talk about the past, here's the modern translation of what Stoicism in 2025 actually looks like. First off, life's chaos is inevitable, and Stoicism is how you meet that chaos. We're not trying to control everything because honestly that's impossible and exhausting. We're training our inner response team. Think of it like this. You cannot control if it rains, but you can choose to bring an umbrella or even dance in the puddles. Don't match the energy, set the tone. What I mean by that is instead of getting pulled into other people's drama or chaos, you get to decide what vibe you bring to the function. Someone's having a meltdown? You don't have to join them. Don't take everything personally, take it as data. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a big one that I'm still working on to this day. When someone's being difficult or something goes wrong, instead of immediately making it about you or your own worth, you can step back and ask, what information is this giving me? What can I learn here? Or when you catch yourself spiraling, you can step back and ask what really matters here. When everything feels overwhelming, zooming out and thinking about what actually matters can feel like turning on a light in a dark room. So all in all, you can think of Stoicism as your emotional operations manual. It's like having a really good toolkit for your emotional and mental well-being that you can reach for when life gets messy. And honestly, if you think about it, it's basically emotional regulation in action. Modern psychology has fancy names for it, like CBT, metacognition, resilience training, but the Stoics were already practicing these things 2,000 years ago. They were kind of the OG therapists, just in tunics. Think about that. Now, lastly, because I said it's a practical philosophy, right? I wanted to introduce you to 5 different tools that are still very much relevant today. The first one is to journal with intention, and we've briefly covered that with Marcus Aurelius, but it's basically just being reflective and asking yourself questions like, what story am I telling myself about my life, about the person that I am, about a certain situation? This is basically metacognition, thinking about your thinking, and it's one of the most powerful skills you can build. The second one is not necessarily a tool, but it is to practice perspective shifts and basically take a step back and ask yourself things like, will this still matter in a year from now? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no, which frees you up to stop giving things more weight than they deserve. The third one is another biggie, and it is to live by values. The Stoics were very big on virtues and values. I will cover the 4 main Stoic virtues in upcoming episodes, so stay tuned for that. An example for living with virtue is asking yourself, what would my wisest self choose here? This kind of value check-in can stop you from being pulled in a million different directions by other people's expectations. The fourth one is a really interesting one as well, because there's also modern neuroscientific findings about this topic. And it's basically imagining loss or imagining if things didn't go as planned. How would I cope with it? Could I handle it? Being grateful for what you already have and knowing that your self-worth doesn't come from external factors or materialistic things, but rather from the person you are within and how you respond, how you show up, etc. This practice, which is sometimes called negative visualization, actually increases appreciation for the present moment because you remember it's not guaranteed. And the last one is probably more relevant today than ever, and it's practicing mini discomforts. I mean, when are we ever really uncomfortable anymore, right? So Stoics used to deliberately put themselves in situations of discomfort to strengthen their resilience and their confidence. And so that could look like stepping out of your comfort zone, having a cold shower, skipping your latte for a day, or having that uncomfortable conversation, right? We want to build resilience and distress tolerance. Think of it like training, because small discomforts now prepare you for the bigger challenges life will eventually throw at you. So today's takeaway is that you could regard Stoicism as emotional strength, plus boundaries, plus some good old ancient wisdom. And honestly, it is not about becoming unfeeling, okay? I cannot stress this enough. It's about feeling everything, just not letting those feelings run the show. If you want to go deeper into this, I created the Stoic Girls Starter Pack, a 120 plus pages workbook that blends Stoicism with psychology and CBT. It's an easy peasy digital download PDF. You can use it on your tablet or print it out like I did here. And it's got all the tools I just talked about: perspective shifts, journaling prompts, values work, even practical discomfort. It's all in there. You can think of it as your personal guide to building emotional resilience with both educational input and practical worksheets. You can of course find the link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching and staying all the way till the end. I know this was a long one. I cannot wait to share the next episode with you. Bye!